All right, today we're jumping into the story of Pennsylvania. It's a state whose history is so tangled up with the American story, you really can't imagine one without the other. We're talking about some seriously radical ideas, revolutionary fire, and just immense industrial power.
So, that really brings us to the big question, right? How did this one state end up becoming the blueprint for a new nation, the battlefield where that nation's survival was tested, and the economic engine that powered it all? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. You know, this quote from way back in 1756 just nails the spirit of early Pennsylvania. This wasn't a place with a rigid class system. It was full of regular, hardworking people who were crazy about their freedom and believed everyone, no matter how rich or poor, deserved basic respect. That attitude, that DNA, is going to shape everything that comes next.
And the whole thing started with a vision that, for its time, was absolutely wild. People called it the Holy Experiment.
But before this experiment could even get off the ground, the land itself was kind of like a hot potato being passed between European powers. First, you had the Swedes show up and call it New Sweden. Then the Dutch came in and took it. And finally, the English grabbed control. It was a messy, contested piece of real estate.
And then, in 1681, William Penn enters the picture. The King of England owed his family a huge chunk of money, so to settle the debt, he just gave him this massive piece of land in America. Now, for the king, it was just a transaction, but for Penn, who was a Quaker, this was a chance to build a society based on his deepest beliefs, total religious freedom, and living peacefully with your neighbors.
And wow, did that idea work. Penn's promise of tolerance was like a giant welcome sign for people all over Europe. Of course, you had Quakers, but also Mennonites, German and Scots-Irish immigrants, Catholics, Jews, you name it. Anyone fleeing persecution saw Pennsylvania as a safe haven. This created this incredible melting pot of cultures and ideas, which, as you'll see, was the perfect environment for a revolution.
Penn also did something pretty remarkable with the native Lenape tribe, building a real relationship based on respect and honesty. But, tragically, that foundation of trust was just destroyed by his sons after he was gone. They cooked up this scheme called the Walking Purchase in 1737, basically using a sketchy old agreement to steal a huge amount of land. It was a total betrayal, and it poisoned relations for generations.
So, with that foundation set, let's move forward. Because this colonial experiment is about to become the absolute center stage of a revolution. Pennsylvania was about to become the crucible where a new nation was forged.
By the time the revolution started brewing, Philadelphia wasn't just some colonial town. It was the biggest, most important city in all of British North America. It was the place to be, buzzing with different cultures, radical new ideas, and a ton of commerce. It was the natural center of gravity for the whole rebellion.
I mean, look at this. It was literally the capital of the Revolution. When the colonies needed to get together, they went to Philly for the First Continental Congress. And the second one, when it was time to write and sign the Declaration of Independence, they did it in Philly. And for 10 years after the war, it was the actual capital of the United States.
But this liberty wasn't just debated in meeting halls. It was fought for and bled for on Pennsylvania soil. You've got Washington's legendary crossing of the Delaware, major battles like Brandywine and Germantown, and of course the absolutely brutal, soul-crushing winter the Army spent at Valley Forge. The state was at the heart of the fight.
And get this, right in the middle of this war for their own freedom, Pennsylvanians took another huge progressive step. In 1780, the state passed a law for the gradual abolition of slavery. They were the very first state to do it.
So, here's the bottom line. After being the birthplace of the Declaration, enduring the war, and leading on abolition, Pennsylvania delivered the final piece. By being the second state, and the really big important one, to ratify the new Constitution, it basically locked the whole structure of the new country together. That's where it gets its nickname, the Keystone State. It's the central stone that holds the whole arch up.
Okay, so the nation is set. Now Pennsylvania changes gears completely. It becomes the industrial giant, the economic engine that's going to build and power America's rise on the world stage.
The 19th century was all about power and connection. The state built these incredible infrastructure projects, like the main line of public works, this massive system of canals and railroads that connected Philadelphia in the east to Pittsburgh in the west. It basically cracked the whole state open for business.
And that connection just lit an economic fire. We're talking about global empires built on steel by guys like Andrew Carnegie. The entire American oil industry? Yeah, that was born in a small town in western Pennsylvania. The state's coal mines fueled the entire country.
and the Pennsylvania Railroad became one of the biggest companies on the planet.
But all that progress and wealth had a really dark side. The state's mines and steel mills became the battlegrounds for some of the most violent and important labor fights in American history, as workers fought for their basic rights against these incredibly powerful companies.
So after dominating the industrial age, the 20th century brought huge new challenges. The giant had to learn to reinvent itself, shifting from being the nation's factory floor to its modern bellwether, a state that shows us where the rest of the country is heading.
And this right here shows you that reinvention perfectly. The old economy, the one built on steel and coal, it faded away. It was replaced by a new economy driven by healthcare and education. People call it eds and meds, along with technology and service industries. A total transformation.
Now that change wasn't easy. It was actually incredibly painful. When the steel industry collapsed in the 70s and 80s, it just devastated communities. This is where the term Rust Belt really came to life. It led to decades of struggle, with people losing their jobs and having to move away.
And as the economy changed, so did the politics. The decline of all that heavy industry and the powerful unions, combined with the growth of diverse suburbs, turned Pennsylvania from a state that was reliably Republican for almost a century into one of the most important political battlegrounds in the country, a true swing state that can decide who becomes president.
And then, on September 11, 2001, a quiet field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, became another sacred place in American history. The passengers of United Flight 93, in an unbelievable act of courage, fought back against their hijackers. They reminded the entire world of that same fierce, freedom-loving spirit that defined Pennsylvania from its very beginning.
So, when you look at the whole picture, from a holy experiment to the crucible of a revolution to the engine of industry, Pennsylvania's story really is America's story. It's always been right there at the center of the nation's biggest turning points. Which leaves us with one last question to think about. As one of the most critical political bellwethers today, is Pennsylvania's next great chapter going to be deciding the nation's future all over again?
If you enjoyed this history of Pennsylvania, we've got more. You can explore another state in our U.S. State Histories playlist. And make sure you subscribe to Notebook Summaries for more explainers just like this one. Thanks for watching.